A little bit of work that shows how I came, to be here today. It's a sort of a PowerPoint presentation. I was a photographer with National Geographic for almost 2 decades, and I was the first guy that they hired in over 10 years. And I think the way I got started was I tried to do pictures that burned people's retinas, made them, very difficult to forget. Let's do the first. That one's forward. Okay. I was in the garbage way before it was popular. It was the first story I recommended they do it, and it was a story I recommended because in 1981, when I proposed this story, there was only one mandatory recycling program in all of America. And I saw what they were throwing away in the rest of the world. And this is a garbage barge going by New York City. This is not set up. I can see everything in there, including the kitchen sink. But we were throwing everything away at that point. Like I said, only one mandatory recycling program in America. In other parts of the world, they were guarding their garbage because it was so valuable. But in America, we were throwing it away. Back in 1985, the managing editor for National Geographic and one of the writers said they had this idea for a story on the sense of smell. And then they wanted to abandon it because they thought there's no way you can photograph the smell. And I said, just leave me alone for a few months, and I'll see what I can do with it. And that became the single most popular story in the magazine's history ever shot by a single photographer. Partly because of this picture. I had like Austin pointed out, I had the best job in the world. They had the worst job in the world. It's a little bit hard to see what's going on here because the room's a little bit too bright. But I wanted to illustrate the power of a hunting dog's sense of smell, which is about 10,000 times more powerful than our own. And so what we did is I dragged a dead pheasant across the field, replaced it with a stuffed one. Then I put it with lights on its collar, and then I released a hunting dog with red lights and did an open exposure, and you can see it smelling across the field until it comes right up to the pheasant, and then we popped the strobe off. That's my nose. We did a smell survey. It was the world's largest scientific survey ever done at that time. Because and we had, I think at that point we had 11 million subscribers to National Geographic. 15% of them actually participated in this smell test. People think that a National Geographic photographer just has a little camera bag and you travel around the world with wads of cash. We had wads of cash, but this is how I traveled. I had 44 cases of equipment and 6 carry-ons. I had 1 assistant. And so I traveled all over the world for about 18 months. I was doing a story on the Mesozoic. That's the midlife of the planet, the age of dinosaurs, basically. It goes from the Triassic all the way to the end of the Cretaceous. And I did that, so like in those cases is black velvet. So I go to the Museum of Denver and wrap it, the backdrop with black velvet, light it like these dinosaurs like jewelry, and I wanted to make these sort of objects that sort of felt beautiful. This is dinosaur tracks in the Andes. So the Andes got faulted up about 5 million years ago, and when the dinosaurs were walking across the lake beds, they're in mudstone. The mud turned to mudstone, and then they got faulted up, and then now the tracks were nearly vertical. So this guy's measuring the tracks so he can measure the speed of these dinosaurs, how fast they were traveling. The last day they found this dinosaur, they found the horns on it. They excavated the head, and the guy goes, "My God, it's a bull. It's they call it the meat-eating bull lizard." Now, when I was at Sundance with this film, I'd written a book about paleontology, about paleontologists, and I basically used tour guides paleontologists as tour guides to guide us all the way from the Triassic, the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, to the end. And so I had an interest in dinosaurs in paleontology. So I took a book up with me to Sundance. It was called Terra. It was called by a friend of mine, Michael Novacek, who's the head of the provost of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And in this book, he's talking about how right now we're losing species faster than scientists can even record the animals that are here on the planet. We're going through what's called the 6th mass extinction. I thought, this is depressing. So I set that book down. And I have another friend who is the head marine scientist for Australia, Charles Verrillen. He wrote a book called The Reef in Time. I picked that book up. And the book was about how the Great Barrier Reef is becoming the Good Barrier Reef because of acidification, because of these insults. We're facing the 6th mass extinction on the reefs. And the reefs are the canary in the coal mine. Previous to all the major mass extinctions, we always lost the coral reefs because of the rise of carbon dioxide. And I thought, this is the biggest issue humanity's ever faced. And I decided right then to make this film. The film is coming out in September 15th. We'll be out in theaters, and then Discovery picked it up at Sundance, became the highest price paid for a documentary in over 5 years. And they're going to be releasing, and I can't say exactly when, but because they're going to be talking about it later, but it'll be right around COP21. This is where the Kyoto protocols are being voted on by the United Nations. But they hope to get 1 billion people to see this film. Let's play that trailer for Racing Extinction. That's the name of the new film.
What's happening now is unprecedented in Earth's history.
Why would we want to disrupt something that took billions of years to evolve?
We need to fight it on all fronts.
I think it's dawning on us now that this is the big one.
OPS is a group I formed. It uses covert operations to expose harmed and endangered species. We're doing an order here. 1 bottle cam. Right there's the lens. 2 buttonhole cameras.
Check 1, 2.
Oh, that's good. Just about everything endangered in the world is for sale in China.
Look at this stuff. Endangered, highly endangered, highly endangered.
The more illegal it is, the more you have to go to the back rooms.
We're definitely not welcome here.
Oh my gosh! There's things going on that are probably not safe to talk about.
Climate is controlled by the ocean.
And we're dumping so much carbon in the oceans, it can't take it anymore.
We found this guy, Mr. Lee.
He's culling and processing whale sharks.
Nobody'd ever gotten a camera in there before.
We run into people with badges and uniforms, strip off all this stuff, throw it over a wall.
Is it a basking shot oil?
Jesus. This world is absolutely insane. Wildlife trade is second only to the drug market in the world. It's that lucrative. We need a getaway driver, and I knew one of the best.
I love it.
To create a heist, to hijack the world's attention.
I think we want to put in an order for a car today.
Excellent, we'll take one.
Blow the lid off this place, right?
There's been 5 major extinctions in the history of the planet.
This may be the 6th.
When you're talking about losing all of nature, it's not a spectator sport anymore. Everybody has to become active somehow. The idea is to inspire people.
Imagery is very powerful.
If you can reach people, you can change them.
We can make this happen. We need people to understand it's worth doing.
People that have been in the business that don't even bother.
But better to light one candle than curse the darkness. There's so many people who sit back and say we're screwed. But you know what? That one candle, maybe someone else with a candle will find you. And I think that's where movements have started. Plankton is responsible for 2 out of every 3 breaths you take, whether you live in Baltimore or in the middle of the country. Most of the oxygen that's in our atmosphere right now was created by plankton, and we're losing that about 1% a year, as scientists say. So this is a huge problem, because carbon dioxide and these other greenhouse gases like methane, you can't see it. And then these guys had this technology that I heard about that made it possible to see it. So
300 camera, and it's got an HD sensor in it, a 720p HD midwave sensor, and we put in a filter right behind the lens. It's the filter that transmits radiation in a band right around 4.3 microns. And you can see if you come forward a little bit. Look at Louis, you can see he's breathing out CO2 gas. And some people have said, well, how do you know you're seeing CO2 and not water vapor? Well, water vapor has different absorption lines, and you can see water vapor with a different camera at a different wavelength. So you're really seeing CO2 gas coming out. There it is on the big projector. And I figured, okay, it's nice to show breathing, but it's also nice to show pure CO2 gas. So I got this CO2 tank, rigged up a nozzle to it so you could squirt out CO2 gas. And it's nice when you look at the monitors over on the right side of the stage, you can see there's a visible image there, and then there's the CO2.
This hidden world is it's the game-changing thing that we need. Is when people see this film, and we've been playing it, like I said, at Sundance. We just played at the DC Environmental Film Festival, and people write back later and said, you know, it changes the way they think. They're gonna, you know, people saying they want to go out and get electric cars, they want to do something to change it. Because once you see it, it gives you the tools to viscerally experience it. You can't do it intellectually. We know carbon dioxide is out there, but once you can see it, then you sort of plan it on the world that you live in. There's all sorts of greenhouse gases you can see with this camera that you guys have developed. It's, you have a whole. Why don't you talk about the family of devices you have?
Well, in racing Extinction, there's a lot of footage of CO2 emissions, but also an even more major greenhouse gas is methane. And so there's some footage of methane in the film as well. For imaging methane, you use a different filter, same camera, but with a different filter at 3.3 microns. And here's what the footage looks like.
World population of humans has doubled in my lifetime. This rapidly increasing population with rapidly increasing technology leads to this pressure on the Earth's resources that is in no way sustainable.
By far and away, the biggest factor in terms of this mass extinction is destroying natural habitat or converting natural habitat into land for food.
Another thing that's happening is that the more dependent we are on meat, milk, and eggs, the greater the greenhouse gas emissions. It's enormous. Cattle and ruminants of all kinds, deer and moose and elk, produce methane as a byproduct of breaking down grass and other things that they feed on.
So the contractions are pushing this gas out from the stomach, going through here in the one-way valve.
Yes, and after this we collect inside the bag.
So how long has that bag been collecting gas?
Only 2 hours. Methane is something like 22 times more potent as a climate-changing gas than is CO2. So it doesn't take very much methane to make a difference.
A cow can basically fill up a 55-gallon garbage bag full of methane every day. One cow's not a problem, but now we have 1.3 billion.
It sounds a bit silly, but if humans could become vegetarians now, it would make a massive difference.
Of all the methane we put into the atmosphere today, about 20% comes from cows and livestock. Another 20% comes from energy.
It's often associated with oil production and with natural gas production. You get quite a bit of methane leakage.
We're putting so much carbon dioxide, so much methane into the atmosphere. We are warming this climate at an incredible rate.
But there's also this large reservoir of methane there in the Arctic. And it's down there under the surface and it's trapped right now because it's frozen.
This lake has a lot of methane bubbling out of it. In fact, we can light those methane bubbles on fire.
So the Arctic is getting gradually warmer. And the methane that's been locked away for millions of years is starting to come out.
When all this gets going, we will have what we call a runaway effect. That's runaway climate change, and it's unstoppable.
The only way to tackle the methane problem is to produce CO2 emissions, because that's what's warming the Arctic and letting this methane bubble up.
We do know from the fossil record that even pre-human climate changes could happen fast. I'm not talking millions of years. I'm talking 3 years, 4 years, way less than a mortgage, less time than it takes for your kid to go through college. But what if the world's temperature goes up 6 degrees in 3 years?
It will lead to massive death in the oceans. When the oceans start dying like that, the planet can't function as it used to function. And when that happens, life everywhere fails. That is a mass extinction.